Maybe we are. I'll find out. Right. I'll just say whatever she does to say, and then she'll write around it. There you go. Really?
I'm an everyday. I could think I am, but I don't.
I could.
No, I don't have some, but I enjoy art, but I don't know really an artist.
Obviously, you're healthy and well.
My father, I have like 4 nephews, and I don't really.
Hello. We're going to get started. Thank you all for coming tonight, and we're going to start things off tonight with a smudge by Jeanne Malmuagik. He's getting it set up now, and he has offered that anyone who would like to come up and receive a smudge is welcome to.
Always is like.
backing on smudging. I usually smudge, when I have to speak the truth. Nothing but the truth, so help me God. Yeah. All right. Thank you, and just to clear your mind, your spirit, and your eyes or ears, your mouth, and you speak. All right. Chiniwich.
Thank you, Jeanne, for that beautiful opening. Miigwech. So I think we're in the best way, ready to get started tonight. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's such a beautiful summer night, and it's wonderful to have you all here. Welcome to I'm going to start again. Oshdeebeganwin, our Treaty Night event. My name is Penelope Smart, the curator at the gallery. I have the pleasure of welcoming all of you here tonight. And in a few short minutes, I'll be passing things over to Cynthia No, who is our community engagement coordinator and the person who put this event together. Before I do that, I'd like to warmly welcome our three speakers. Michelle Solomon, Jeanne Malmuagik, and Nicole Richmond. Thank you for being here tonight and sharing your words with us. So a few short housekeeping notes and a few news on exhibitions to share before we get started in the formal part of our event. So for housekeeping, as you saw on the way in, masks are appreciated but not required. Bathrooms are in the lobby, so back out through the glass doors and to your right. And I'd like to remind everyone that tonight is being live streamed on YouTube, so hello to everyone out there in YouTube land. Thanks for tuning in. So it's being live streamed on YouTube and is also being recorded. And finally, following our speakers tonight, please stick around and enjoy some light refreshments that will be served in the lobby. So tonight we are talking treaties, or one treaty in particular. But first, a few words about our summer exhibitions. From my view, both of these exhibitions, and from perhaps all different perspectives, are interesting settings or environments or even stories for tonight's discussion. So in case some of you had the chance while we were waiting for things to get started, in the galleries over there, the galleries next door, is an exhibition called I, Voyageur. And the Voyageur in this story is a woman named Naomi Harris, an artist, a photographer, and a self-proclaimed modern woman who spent 70 days paddling a canoe in an ankle-length, button-up 19th century dress. She set out to paddle the old fur trade route from Montreal to Fort William, retracing the route taken by another woman, a painter named Frances Ann Hopkins. Franny Ann, as she became to be known in the sort of art history books, was the English, and so that means British and privileged, wife of a high-ranking Hudson's Bay official who traveled this route more than 100 years ago. So I encourage you to explore Naomi's images and journey. And this exhibition also includes a free brochure with an essay and travel map and images as sort of navigational tours. So in this room, the bright, bold, and animated works that surround us are part of the exhibition called Woodland Pop that you might have noticed coming in. These works marvel at new expressions of woodland style. So across from me, I'm staring at it right now, straight this way, straight in front of me, is a striking view of Anishinaabe by Blake Anishinaabe and Mad Dog Jones. Well, you all have a chance to turn your heads. Behind me, especially for those viewing online, you can. I'm standing behind these beautiful in front of these beautiful paintings. So behind me is a breathtaking new series of paintings by Kristen Chapman, which are very fitting for this summer night because these paintings, as he says, are inspired by Super Kid, which is an ice cream flavor you can get at Intercity Mall. So very fitting for tonight. The animated work that many of you were checking out, Bakwani Makwa, or which translates to a smoky bear, a kind of play on Smokey the Bear, by Quinn Hopkins and Blake Anishinaabe, is here with us too. This will be minted as the gallery's first NFT, and come find me later if all of that was gibberish. These artists, all these artists in the show, we're so proud to have them here. They take pop culture to new, ancient, and extraordinary places. So just a reminder, both of these shows are open all summer until September 25th. All right, moving on to our main event. One more quick word from me. In my role as curator, a land acknowledgement is an interesting element in tonight's introduction, in my introduction here. And so, instead of starting off with it, as many of us are now familiar with, I've left it until the end of my remarks, as a kind of bridge into the rest of the evening. Here it is. I'd like to acknowledge that the Thunder Bay Art Gallery is located on the traditional territory of Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. The land upon which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Métis. The gallery recognizes these treaties and is dedicated to providing space for Indigenous voices to be heard. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our host of the evening, Cynthia No. Cynthia No is Two-Spirit Anishinaabe Kwe, Wolverine Clan from Red Rock Indian Band or Lake Helen First Nation. She is also French. Cynthia holds an Ontario College Advanced Diploma in Multimedia Production from Confederation College. Cynthia is also a multimedia artist and passionate about social and climate justice. She is a self-taught beater and a painter who studied painting as a spiritual practice for many years. She now teaches this way of painting and delights in sharing its philosophy with others. As community engagement coordinator here at the gallery, she brings very much caring insight and creativity into the public events just like this one. These are events that connect us to art, each other, and things so much bigger than that. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you so much, Penelope. Bonjour, Indigenous. Hello, all of my relatives. Kwekwetabik Indigenous, Wingagin and Dodem, Opwaganasan and Doji, Benese Wekwadong and Doji. My name is Cynthia No. My pronouns are she and her. I'm Wolverine Clan, Two-Spirit Anishinaabe Kwe. I'm French on my dad's side. And my mom's family comes from Opwaganasanin or Red Rock or Lake Helen. I am super honored to be the community engagement coordinator here. I get to do amazing things like this. And I'm happy to be here with you all tonight for this hybrid event. So Chimagwech, thank you all for coming. And I want to say a special Bindigan or welcome to the people that are joining us in line as well. So tonight is a very special event for me. The inspiration came during an exhibition that we had here earlier this year called Indigenous Ingenuity, which was a partnership with our friends at Science North and the Indigenous Tourism Ontario. And the world we know today is in part fashioned by Indigenous people's innovations and approaches to science. Some examples of these inventions, like canoes and parkas, are very important, a big part of our lives today. And while the materials that we use for these things may have changed, the design has stayed relatively the same. And during my research, during that exhibit, I found some images of treaties with symbols on them that resemble pictographs, and that they could correlate to the clans. So it really captured my imagination, and I'm just fascinated by that. So I hope to learn more about that tonight. And yeah, so in regards to our treaty, the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850, much more was agreed to than actually made it into the document. I believe that there's much context missing, and we as Canadians are not upholding all of our responsibilities to each other, to be sure, but I also think about our relatives, the land, the plants, and the animal nations. Some context may be there if we relearn about these concepts that were built into these original systems, and key knowledge will have been passed down through oral history and teachings given to descendants of the original signers, and we're super fortunate to have one of these descendants here with us tonight. My vision for the event was to take a look at what treaties mean, and our treaty in particular, using an Anishinaabe worldview lens. And so one of the descendants of those original signers is here tonight, Jeanne Malmuagik, as well as Michelle Solomon and Nicole Richmond, who are all experts in their own right. The Thunder Bay Art Gallery could not have hosted this event without you, so Chimigwech for coming and being here with us tonight. I also want to say Chimigwech to all of my colleagues for helping put the event together. I also want to acknowledge Bruce Beardy, who's on the board, the gallery's board of directors, and Jeanne Malmuagik, who helped with the translation during the planning process. And we want to make sure that there's enough time tonight to get through all of the amazing content that our speakers have put together. So the plan is to hear from all of the speakers, and then hopefully there will be time at the end for some questions. So without further ado, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our first speaker and then invite her to come up. Michelle Solomon is a member and elected councillor of Fort William First Nation in her third term of office. She's a proud mother and grandmother. Michelle earned a BA Indigenous Learning degree at Lakehead University and a social service worker diploma from Confederation College. One of her many roles as councillor is to provide guidance and knowledge towards a substantial portfolio area for the First Nation, which includes health and community services, finance, and youth and social development. Michelle's main area of expertise is mental health and addictions, stemming from her many years of employment as a team leader and manager at Delico Anishinaabe Family Care and Health Center Manager for White Cedar. Her background in these areas has allowed her to obtain a strong understanding of opioid addiction and treatment. Michelle currently works for the Ontario Native Women's Association as a Community Development Manager. In her role as Community Development Manager, Michelle leads programs focused on Indigenous women's leadership, and Michelle also served on the Onwa Board of Directors from 1988 to 1993. Please help me welcome Michelle Solomon.
Hello. I have a timer for myself here because I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull this off in 20 minutes, but I'm going to give it my best shot. Ani Boju, Oshdeebeganwin. My name is New Path Woman. I'd like to just quickly start by acknowledging my ancestors, the ancestors of the Indigenous people that have come here tonight. Some of you I know, some of you I don't know, but nonetheless, a lot of things happened historically that have gotten us here today, and some of you will be familiar with some of the information I'm going to share. For some of you, this will be the first time you're hearing this information. I need to also give voice to the fact that some of this information is troubling, and it can evoke strong feelings, it can evoke emotion, regardless of whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous. We've all been impacted by the experience that happened a long time ago, and how those have permeated the world that we live in today. So important to give voice to those things. I want to say Chimigwech to Jeanne for starting us off with a smudge. I think that just starting with a smudge helps to center me, helps to ground me, helps to make sure that I'm expressing myself in a way that is respectful and is mindful of who I'm speaking about and who I'm speaking for and what messages I'm portraying to the community. So if I can just have you go to the next slide. So the Vidal-Anderson report. So the Vidal-Anderson report, this is kind of, where a lot of information really starts with regards to the Robinson Superior Treaty. Because Vidal and Anderson were two commissioners that were appointed by the Crown at that time, and that happened in 1849. So these commissioners were appointed to go to the North Shore of Lake Superior and find, well, it wasn't just the North Shore, actually. They also investigated the lands of the Robinson-Huron Treaty, but for tonight's purposes, of course, we're speaking of the Robinson Superior Treaty, so I will focus on that. So they were hired to investigate the different tribes that lived on the land around Lake Superior and Lake Huron, as well as identify who the tribes were, who the chiefs were, where their respective hunting grounds were, and I guess, one of the things that is really troubling about this is, they rely largely on information from the Hudson's Bay Company representatives that were along the North Shore, and there were trading posts There were trading posts at Fort William First Nation, Pick River, Mishpicotton, Nipigon House, and Long Lake. So, it's really, unfortunately, has not changed that much after all these years from 1849 to today, in that oftentimes, information is sought about Indigenous people more than it's sought from Indigenous people. Has it improved? Yes, it's improved, but certainly, at this time, that was not the case. It was largely information gathered from the non-Indigenous settlers that lived or were posted in this area. So, and the information that they gathered really impacted how the treaty actually was written in the end. So I believe that this will be talked about more by Nicole, but to just touch on it briefly, some of the miscommunications that happened and resulted in a lot of, it resulted in land claims, and it resulted in misunderstandings and probably more fighting amongst settler and Indigenous people. Because speaking for Fort William First Nation, the land that was agreed to in the treaty and the land that was actually identified in the treaty were wrong. And so this created a lot of conflict. One of the misunderstandings was leagues versus miles. So a mile obviously is a mile, and a league is 3 miles. And so when you start looking at the land that was provided for in the treaties for the amount of people in the community, it was not a realistic amount of land. So this here is a quote from the treaty itself. "And the said William Benjamin Robinson, of the first part, on behalf of Her Majesty and the government of this province, hereby promises and agrees to make the payments as before mentioned, and further to allow the said chiefs and their tribes the full and free privilege to hunt over the territory now ceded by them, and to fish in the waters thereof as they have heretofore been in the habit of doing, saving and accepting only such portions of the said territory as may from time to time be sold or leased to individuals or companies of individuals and occupied by them with the consent of the provincial government. So, again, you know, some very contentious and conflictual issues arise out of this. And of course, you know, this information using settlers' information, the written document that they have, so where the treaty was signed September 7th, 1850, and yes, in fact, it was signed in Sault Ste. Marie. However, you know, a lot of information that people don't have is that there were several meetings that took place leading up to this date. And there's record of meetings taking place as early as August 21st, 1850. And these meetings involved a lot of conflict and contention. Contention between the chiefs that were there, and definitely between the settlers and the Indigenous people. It's really important to note here that Pic River, Pic Mobert, and Long Lake were not present during the treaty signing in 1850. And at that time, the Anishinaabe of Fort William First Nation agreed not to interfere with settlers, and in return, the Crown promised trade goods and annuity payments beginning in 1851. They were also promised complete freedom to hunt and fish as before, except for on private land. At the time of the signing of the treaty, the people were thriving and living off the land. People were making a living in traditional ways, but also engaged in trade with the Hudson's Bay Company, selling furs and other goods. Many families made their living through commercial fishing, and this involved exporting barrels of salted fish to Detroit and other places. But significant to this is that they relied on the islands in Lake Superior to fish from and to do the exporting of the barrels of fish. And unfortunately, when it came to the signing of the treaty and the expropriation of lands, the islands were not included in the treaty. And I think it's also important to note that, you know, it wasn't long after this where there was a rise in provincial hunting laws. And at the end of the century, you know, Indigenous people started to be penalized. The hunters and trappers and fishermen were actually being imprisoned for practicing their treaty rights. And this was all done, the charging of the men and women was done to support commercial fisheries of settlers, and this devastated the Great Lakes, and it made settlers a lot of money. And that was of course seen as far more important than the actual treaty relationship. Next slide, please. So here, this is a letter that was written to Indian Affairs in 1902 from Fort William First Nation. And it reads, "We, the Indians of Fort William Band, earnestly beg of you to help us, and we trust you will do so. We do not like how the white people are disturbing us for a property that we have left for ourselves. When we last sold our land to Mr. William B. Robinson of the Robinson Superior Treaty, we had swore that we would not sell another acre, and the Indian Department had agreed and also promised that we would not be disturbed any more to the last of an Indian." So, and the reason this slide is here is there were several land takings that happened at Fort William First Nation after this. And before actually this letter was written. And there's actually a lot of historical records where there's letters that go back and forth between the militia and the Indian agent and the representation of Fort William. So next slide. Sorry. I wasn't trying to wait till you walked away. The 1905 forced relocation of Fort William Band, this was very significant, one of the most significant expropriations at Fort William First Nation. So in 1905, it was a railway taking of 1,634 acres. It's the largest railway taking in the history of Canada. The entire village and land was expropriated for the building of a grain terminus by the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway. And this was all done with the permission of the federal government. The community and all the buildings were evicted from the only good land that remained after the Neebing surrender, which took place in 1859, and that was 6,300 acres. So when this happened, the communities and the buildings had to be moved, and the people, of course, then moved to different areas of the land. So it actually created, two small communities in one community when this happened, with like half of the people relocating to the mountain village, which is at the foot of the mountain, and it's really what's called swampy land. And actually, even today, there has to be very large ditches that are behind all those homes on Mission Road, because it's very, very swampy, very wet, not really good for, definitely no good for farming, not really great for building, but nevertheless, that was the land that we had to work with. And then the other half relocated to what is called today Squaw Bay. And there's even reference to the people that remained in Mission Bay or in the mission being Christian, and the people that moved to Squaw Bay being the pagans. So there's some, that of course is some difference in belief system as well, over time. In the end of all this, the GTP went bankrupt and the grain terminus was never completed. I think, though, the most disturbing part of this for me, and I'm sure, I have no doubt you will find this disturbing as well, was that not only were the buildings and the people evicted from this land, but also the cemetery was evacuated. So all of the ancestors of this land had to be unearthed and moved. And so if you're familiar with Squaw Bay now, there's a cemetery in Squaw Bay. And I remember as a child, a young child, my dad taking me to where the cemetery was, and it was just this little footpath that went into this cemetery. And so back then it was just a mound with just some boards fenced around it. It's certainly, it has been made bigger today. So there's a burial mound on one side, and then on the other side is where we have our burials today that are marked graves. And so the other thing, the reserve was at this point left without any frontage on the Kaministiquia River. So it's really hard for me to understand how people do this to people, how humans do this to human. And I'm not here to make anybody feel guilty or, blame anybody. That's not the point of my conversation. I just hope people will go away with a better understanding of, the condition that society was in at that time, and, the horrible way that Indigenous people were treated. And what was used as the basis for this treatment was that, we were savages. So you either believed in the religion, the God that was being presented, or you were a savage and you were disposable. Next slide. Okay, so the rifle range. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with the rifle range. It didn't go away that many years ago, so some people may remember it. So in 1905, the Department of Militia approached the Department of Indian Affairs seeking 100 acres of reserve land for a rifle range. So this was, just on the heels of Grand Trunk Pacific and the community being evicted from its land. This occurred at a time when the whole community had just been displaced as a result of the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway taking. The militia had written several letters to the Department of Indian Affairs pressuring for the sale of land. Fort William First Nation finally gave into pressure in the hopes of rebuilding the community following the GTP displacement from their community and from all of their farmlands. 112 acres of land was surrendered for the Department of Defense in 1907. The militia was dissatisfied with this acquired land, though, and pressed for new portions of the reserve. So in 1914, Canada passed an order in council that exchanged the 1907 range for new land without any monetary compensation to Fort William First Nation and against the express wishes of the chief and council. And there's many letters that prove this. It's really important to note here that there is no authority in the Indian Act to exchange land. The First Nation must either agree that the land can be taken, which is surrender to the Crown for sale, or the land must be expropriated, just taken. An additional 47.65 acres was surrendered in 1914. The Department of National Defense operated the rifle range until 1997, when it was finally decommissioned. So 90 years they held this land. Another point I like to make about this rifle range land is, for those of you who are familiar with Mount McKay or Anishinaabe Cosmology, that is known as a very sacred place for Indigenous people, not just to Fort William First Nation, but it was a gathering place for Indigenous people, for ceremony and for many reasons, for many years. And so this rifle range was actually, the mountain was the butt stop for the rifle range. So that's what they shot into, was our sacred mountain. And so that is very unsettling, and it's still unsettling today. Next slide. Shall I continue? I've got just a couple of slides left. 5 more minutes. Okay, and this is really important, and I think it needs to be heard. This is not, oh yes it is, okay. So in 1909, Fort William First Nation surrendered and sold 3 lots of land totaling 120 acres to the Delaware Syndicate. And these lands were misleadingly identified as mining locations, and it was later revealed that they were actually going to build a brick plant. This sale was way below market value, and there was a promise to the people of Fort William, when it was revealed that it was going to be a brick plant, that the people would be given jobs. The sale was also conditional on payment of $10,000 for liquidated damages if the plant failed. The plant did fail within a few years, and the Department of Indian Affairs also failed in its fiduciary duty to collect the $10,000 on our behalf for damages that was promised. Or if they did collect it, it was never given to Fort William First Nation. So in 1914, the town of Fort William also obtained a quarry site of about 25 acres between the lots that were earlier obtained in 1909 by the Delaware Syndicate. So these lots were later acquired by the Great Lakes Paper Company. The Chief and Council objected to this and asked the Department of Indian Affairs to purchase the land and return it to the reserve. Of course, that was denied, and the Great Lakes Paper Company began using this land as a landfill site for waste material, or bark. So it became known as the bark dump. And so it was bark from the mill, and this continued for 25 years, where massive amounts of bark waste was dumped. This landfill reached 40 acres and 100 feet high. 100 feet high. So if you go onto the mountain today and look down over the scenic view, there's trees planted on top of there, but you'll see the height of this bark dump. And what's really troubling about this is the leachate that has happened from the carcinogenic materials that was dumped there. So, and there's people who've been living along that area for all these years. My daughter and her 3 children live right near there. And we have very, very high rates of cancer in our community. And if you look at the railway land, all along there has all been heavy industrial use of that land. And again, there's people who live on the stretch of City Road from, if you know where THP is, the gas station there, to Bannon's Gas Bar, where the bridge is. I don't know the numbers of people who have died of cancer that have lived on that land, but there are many. And I guess I would hazard to say that if any of you live on Gore Street, I'd be concerned as well, because you are equally exposed to the carcinogenic material that has been used in that land. Next slide. So this slide here, this is a map that is part of a presentation that I do on this material that I usually take a full hour to present. But I wanted to and I talk about all of these land takings. So I haven't covered all of them today, but I wanted to show you this map to give you a visual representation of the land that's been taken. And actually there's another map that I should have brought and I didn't, because it really shows quite well, you know, the land from 1850 and the current Fort William First Nation today. So, but all the colored areas of the maps is land that was either surrendered or expropriated, including that 6300 there on the left-hand side of the map. That is all Anishinaabe Township. Yeah, so I think that that is significant to mention. Next slide. So, what went right with the treaty? This question. I was talking to my mother about this presentation that I do, and describing it to her because she had never heard me talk about it. And I said, well, you know, I show a map of the land, and I talk about the different land takings, and basically I talk about what went wrong with the treaty. And she said, well, Michelle, like, what went right with the treaty? And really, you know, I don't know what went right with the treaty. I can't think of anything that went right with the treaty. You know, I can only acknowledge that here's where we are today, and I can appreciate all of you who are here to gain a better understanding of what has happened. And I like to talk about the Robinson Superior Treaty in relation to Fort William First Nation because I know it's land that you are all familiar with. But we could really take this land and any other First Nation in Canada and tell the same story. And I think that, you know, if you walk away with anything from this, understand that this story is Fort William First Nation right now, but it's every reserve in Canada. And some stories are far more horrific. So we can only move forward from here. Yeah, as I said, industrial history has provided, you know, high rates of cancer. And, you know, I think it's also important to highlight the economic marginalization that has happened due to the loss of lands, the loss of opportunities that could have been afforded to the people of that land, the loss of all of the best waterfront property that we had, the loss of all farmable land that we had. And I think, though, you know, for me, the loss of language, because I grew up too close to Kmart, Walmart, whatever, you know, so there's a very low number of people at Fort William First Nation who speak the language. And so it's, there's a lot of work to get that back. And our ways of being, you know, so a lot of our young people are starting to regain a lot, you know, knowledge of our ways of knowing and being from a long time ago. But again, it's, you know, it's going to take a lot of time, and it's unfortunate, but you know, that's where we find ourselves today. You know, I'm open to having this conversation anytime. You know, like I said, I didn't talk about everything on that map, but there's issues of Chippewa Park, Loch Lomond, and the things that happen with regards to those land. So thank you for coming here, and thank you for hearing me and listening to me. And you know, I welcome any feedback or questions later. And Chimiigwech.
Chimiigwech, Michelle. Yes, a lot of that is quite difficult to hear, but I appreciate you sharing. I really feel like it's something that we all need to hear and reflect on. So our next speaker, Nicole Richmond, is a lawyer and a wellness consultant from Bitigan-Nishtebeg. She regularly advises First Nations and their organizations in areas related to nation building, Anishinaabe constitutionalism, capacity development, and self-determination. Nicole is a jingle dress and fancy shawl dancer, a beater, and a seamstress, and she lives in Thunder Bay. Please help me welcome Nicole Richmond.
To our tech person, can I use this to click along? I have many slides. So I'm going to try and go through this really quickly for you. And I'm also going to set a timer and give myself 5 minutes on top of that timer. Just kidding, Michelle. Just kidding. I should have been more organized. I'm really happy to be here. Michelle and I are actually just getting back from Vancouver. I don't know if you guys heard what was going on in Vancouver. There was some interesting discussions about leadership and customary governance. And one thing that was really amazing, we heard our national chief give a speech that just made me so happy. And she talked about the nature of Anishinaabe law, of Indigenous laws being handed down from the Creator. And so what I'm going to talk about today is, I'm going to actually talk more closely into the microphone so you guys can hear me better. Can you hear me now? That's a joke. I have been compulsively presenting on Zoom for the last 2.5 years and have not been in front of a crowd in a long time, so I can feel your energy. Thank you for being here. Yeah, I'm gonna need another smudge after this. But I really want to key in on a few things, which is our understanding of law is very different. Anishinaabe people have a higher responsibility to take care of the land. We have relationships with animals. We have relationships with spiritual beings that are unseen, and I'm going to show you some slides about that. But our primary responsibility is to the Creator. And so when Michelle talks about the relationship with the land that the Fort William First Nation people have, or that Bigtgong Anishinaabe people have, it's very different. It is not exclusively for our benefit. We are not put here to use land just because we're capitalists and we're using land and we're consuming land. We have a responsibility to the 7 generations that are going to come after us to take care of this land and use it in a good way. So I want to go through a whole year of Indigenous legal traditions, which I just finished teaching at the Bor-Alaskan School of Law, Faculty of Law. It's hard to get this done in 20 minutes. It's hard to get this done at all. Does this thing work? Before we get started, I want to acknowledge this territory. We hear territory acknowledgements, but I want to say, I've been welcomed onto this territory by my friends from Fort William First Nation in profound ways. They invite me to powwow on their land, on Nimpkiwaju. They bring me out into the territory. This is sacred and holy land, you know? And one thing that I can say is Thunder Bay is aptly named. We have very beautiful territory which captures thunder. We often have storms here, and I don't know if I'm not a geologist or anything, but I think it has to do with the fact that we have all this mineral underneath the ground. We have crystals, we have amethyst. It's a very sacred and holy territory. It's territory that my family has always acknowledged as a gathering place and a place that's very important. And I think you can feel that energy here, and I think, you know, even though Thunder Bay is in the middle of a lot of media storms, I think the work that we're doing here in terms of role modeling how to heal is significant, and we should hold ourselves up to a high standard to say, look, maybe in 20 years we'll be the role model for showing how this can be done. And so for all the people that are here as advocates and allies and friends to Anishinaabe people, Miigwech thank you for being here, because this is an important conversation. Now I'm going backwards. Oh my God. I should have practiced this. There are many types of treaties, and we talk primarily, our primary understanding, in the case law and just in the media is about international treaties. But Anishinaabe people understand different types of treaties. We have treaties between ourselves and the unseen beings, the Manitous. We have treaties between ourselves and the animal nations that informs the clan system. So for example, I'm from the Eagle clan. I have responsibilities to the Eagle. And I'll just say briefly, as an Eagle clan member, often I think about the eagle who flies very high. And from that vantage point, the eagle can look at the finest of details, right? But the eagle is caring for the big picture, but able to see the very smallest of things. And that's the way I sort of look at my practice of nation building and thinking about who we are within the big picture and what that looks like. So there are treaty relationships that are beyond just human to human. We also acknowledge treaty relationships with the Star Nations, and that's one of my favorite things. I want to talk to you a little bit about cosmology before we move on from this. We have treaty relationships, of course, between Anishinaabe people and the land. We also have historic treaty relationships between, for example, the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, so the Ojibwe people and the Mohawk. We have, for example, the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. We have historic treaties between Anishinaabe people, or between Haudenosaunee people and the earlier settlers who came, the Turo Wampum. There's a huge, vast, very fascinating history here of the application of treaty principles. I want to go through this really quickly, but I want you to understand, because I think Jeanne is going to talk more about the Indigenous Anishinaabe perspective. When we, Anishinaabe people, were created, we were placed here on purpose. Kichi Manitou, the Great Spirit, had a vision, and that was that the spirits would descend onto Earth to have a human experience, so that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And that's the very fundamental belief of Anishinaabe people. We're not just here to live and die, we're here to serve a bigger purpose. And one thing that Basil Johnston, who's a really foundational Anishinaabe philosopher, talks about, he talks about that there are creatures and beings that are seen and unseen. And that's really foundational to our belief system, because we make, for example, gift offerings. If we are going out into the water, we offer sema, we put tobacco down to acknowledge that there are spirits who care for the water and who are underneath the water systems. We have a treaty relationship to interact. If we make a gift, with the gift that we give back is the safe passage. We have, and I'm not going to go into a detailed list of all of our unseen beings, because we'll be here for 16 months, but there are many creatures in our so-called mythology that we constantly put gifts out for and that we acknowledge. This is more than just a three-dimensional reality. There are other spiritual realms that exist, that coexist with us on this earth, and we are constantly in relationship with them, whether we see them or we know them or we acknowledge them. That's one of our core beliefs. Edna Manitowopi also shares a creation story, and I just wanted to share this with you. Edna shares a beautiful story about the creation, and I just love, I can't go through all of this in detail, but one of the foundational beliefs that's part of what Edna teaches is that Anishinaabe people were lowered, that we were lowered from somewhere. And so another one of our teachers is Eddie Benton Benai, and when he translates the word Anishinaabe, he says that the etiology of the word has to do with the original man of the species being lowered. And if you really think about what that means, if I'm lowered, where did I exist beforehand, right? Like that the place of where we actually come from is not Earth, it's somewhere else. And so I just want to emphasize that that's our core belief system. And so when we live here on this planet, it's an intentional thing. We're here on purpose. This is not just some mistake of, or maybe some happenstance of, human evolution. We were placed here on purpose. And it's really important to remember that. So when we think about Anishinaabe cosmology, we remember that there are worlds, other than the one that we come from, that exist and that we have responsibilities back to. We have humans who were created as a result of spiritual beings manifesting into the physical and sometimes mating with humans, so that our nature, who we are, comes from a spiritual realm, and that we've become this on purpose. And so what are we actually doing here, right? And that's the big picture that I think, that's the big question I think about a lot. The earth is something that is actually alive. We believe that it has its own spirit, it has its own sense of awareness, that it's a sentient, conscious being, and that our responsibility is to communicate and care for the earth in ways that are really important. And so when I think about this and I talk about this, I think about, how can I breathe air in a way that will improve Earth? If you think about the fact that I breathe oxygen and I exhale carbon dioxide, right? And what do trees breathe? They breathe carbon dioxide and they exhale oxygen. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful system. So if I'm constantly contributing to the earth, or if you can think about water, I take in water, and there's homeopathy, there are ideas about water having memory. So if I'm ingesting water and I'm ingesting water in a way that's toxic, or I'm thinking negative thoughts, that goes out into the water, that goes out into the river, that goes out into the underground water systems. So I think about ways that I can improve the earth by being a good person. So if I can bring water into my body and I can just have a great old day, and when the water moves through me, my hope is that the water will be in service to humanity in ways. If you believe that water has memory, and there's a lot of science about this. And so I just want to conclude on this point to say that core belief is that Anishinaabe people are here. People in general are here because there's a treaty relationship that was negotiated for us to be here on this planet to serve this earth.
and that there are higher level beings or places of existence that have negotiated this treaty for us to be here. And I just really want you to think about that. Being alive is a huge, big gift. I'm going to go over this. I'm going to pass over this, but this is a slide that I've been working on for a really long time. So I'm trying to, in my practice, communicate why and what Anishinaabe beliefs are in terms of our legal systems, and how that informs a holistic system that informs our ancestors who went to the treaty signing, who were negotiated. We have very different beliefs about what we're doing here and what our responsibilities are. We believe that we're all connected. We believe that there's something for everybody. We don't believe in scarcity. We believe that if we share and we cooperate, it's more of a holistic system rather than, capitalism, which is a hierarchy system where there's someone at the top that has to control the flow of resources. It's a very different idea. We believe that the core thing that we're doing is to live in balance, this principle of Minobamadazewin. We have a responsibility to live in a good way, and that is what we're doing here. We also, when I talked about the national chief at the Assembly of First Nations making her speech about treaties, what she was saying was that these treaties are handed down to us, and that we have Indigenous legal principles that are handed down to us from the Creator. And I just want to show you some of these principles. This is from the Assembly of First Nations. I think it's from it's from 2013. It says, "A treaty is a sacred covenant, a solemn agreement that is truly the highest form of an agreement, binding as long as the sun shines, as the sun rises, the grass grows, and the rivers flow. So solemn is a treaty that it centers around one of our most sacred ceremonies, the pipe. The pipe itself is alive with a spirit. Each pipe has its own spirit. The treaties were entered into using Indigenous laws and the use of a pipe." And so a pipe ceremony is a very sacred and holy ceremony, so that when we agree to come into a relationship through the pipe, we observe that there are the unseen beings, the spirit beings, the Creator, that are observing this sacred agreement. It's not simply negotiating a contract at the brick for purchasing furniture. A treaty is so much more. It's being observed by all of our 7 generations that have come before us and that will go after us. And I'm going to give you just a little bit of history, and then I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the Robinson Superior Treaty. In 1763, Canada was being settled, and for those of you that know a little bit of history in Canada, there was historically a war between the French and the British, who were fighting for control of what became British North America, which tells you who won the war. King George, at the time, 1763, after the 7-Year War, issued a proclamation, and there were a number of tenets in this important document, and one of them said, look, if you are going to buy land in British North America, you have to enter into a treaty with Indigenous people. You must enter, you cannot privately purchase land. You cannot privately purchase land from an individual Indigenous person. You must enter into a treaty relationship with the whole of the First Nation. There is a process that has to be entered into. And so this gives rise to the principle of land being held collectively by Indigenous people, going back to the 1763 treaty. And First Nations people, it creates restrictions on us because we can only sell land to the government. I, as an individual, can't just sell my on-reserve First Nation land. I can't even sell it. I can sell my house, which is situated on the land. The underlying title is actually, by some miracle of Canadian law, somehow the underlying title on my reserve land or on Aboriginal title land is owned by the Crown. Even though in Canada, Indigenous people were not conquered, we don't have wars, and we don't have a process by which Canada obtained the underlying title. By just some stroke of law, and I have a bunch of strides. If you ever want to hear of this presentation, you can find me on YouTube, probably talking about it somewhere. But Canada believes that they have the underlying title to all of the land, and that Indigenous title is actually a burden on the Crown's underlying title, which is interesting, and that has been acknowledged by the Canadian Supreme Court of Canada as being problematic, which is going to have to be addressed at some point. However, the third thing to say is that in order to have a valid treaty, the chiefs and principal men have to come together in an assembly. So when Michelle talks about the treaty council that were entered into in 1850 at Sault Ste. Marie, this is attempting to meet the requirements of the Royal Proclamation. In 1764, so it's one thing for the King George to make a big statement about what should happen. In 1764, our people came together and they actually got together. 2,000 or more people came together, chiefs and principal men, to record the terms of the Royal Proclamation in a treaty, the Treaty of Niagara. And if you think about how long that would take to get to Thunder Bay, from Thunder Bay to treaty to Niagara Falls, back in 1764, was a major commitment. Our people recognized how important this was. It was recorded in wampum, so the terms and the conditions were recorded both orally. We have powerful and excellent people that have recorded the terms of the treaty in their memory, but we also have mnemonic devices by which we recount the terms of the treaty. So one of these is the belt, and I will not go into details about this. After the 1763 treaty, Royal Proclamation, and the 1764 treaty was entered into, the Anishinaabe people in this area were historically aligned with the French, which is why, as Michelle talked about, the Anishinaabe people in this area thought they were negotiating for leagues because they were in a relationship with the French, and that was the unit of measure that they were used to. You guys understand? So Minavavana says, and he's a historic chief, and this is just after the Royal Proclamation, he says, look, we were allied with the French. We are not in a treaty relationship with you until you come and specifically negotiate the terms of the treaty with us. We are still at war with you. We were allied with the French. The French were defeated, but we were not defeated. And so he issues a wonderful speech. And I think we should have children's books that talk about Minavavana. We should have we should be celebrating these wonderful leaders. This should be part of our curriculum. So Minavavana says, Englishmen, although you have conquered the French, you have not conquered us. We are not your slaves. These lakes, these woods and mountains were left to us by our ancestors. They are inheritance, and we will part with them to none. Englishmen, your king has never sent us any presents, nor entered into any treaty with us, wherefore he and I are still at war. And until he does these things, we must consider that we have no other father nor friend among the white men than the King of France. And so he's sending an important signal, which is to say, it's time to enter into a treaty with us. And so this is the impetus. There are also a number of other things. There's the discovery of natural resources. There's the discovery of copper and silver and gold potential in this area. And so we have the Lake Superior Treaty, which becomes known as the Robinson Superior Treaty in the blue, and the Robinson Huron Treaty in the red. The Vidal Anderson Commission, as Michelle talked about. Chief Pudashat is a chief who Michelle also talked about, who made representations at the Treaty Council. And he says, he makes important speeches. We should also have books about him that talk about owning the land and responsibilities to the land. And I'm not going to read that to you. I just want to get to the terms of the treaty, the ones that are written. The terms that made it to the treaty that was negotiated in one day for ceasing and surrendering the whole North Shore of Lake Superior. I can barely enter into a will in one day. You can't even do a land transaction now to purchase a house in one day, right? You have to have title searches, you have to have mortgages, you have to have environmental searches. I have no idea how it could be considered appropriate to enter into such a huge agreement to cease and surrender this huge tract of land in one day. Impossible, in my view. The terms and conditions that were agreed to far exceed, I think, what shows up in the written text. Here are the main terms, though, that show up on the text, that the land should be ceased and surrendered. Now, Indigenous people don't even believe that we own land. How would we ever believe that we could cease and surrender it, right? Does that even make sense? There's a 2,000 pound one-time payment which is given in exchange for the land. We know the value of land far exceeds that amount. There's also a $4 annuity that's given to each of the family members that are parties to the treaty. That number has not changed since 1850, so if I was going to go and collect my treaty payment right now, I have never collected a treaty payment in my life, but if I was going to, I would be entitled to approximately $168. So you can do the math to find out how old I am. I just did that math in my head right now to come up with that number. This $4 annuity has given rise to litigation, which is currently before the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. There's a series of preliminary decisions by a lady named Patricia Hennessy, who's been presiding. She's been doing an excellent job, which have been appealed and which are going to be appealed all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. Although Justice Hennessy has said there are serious breaches that need to be remedied. I want to conclude on this point, and then I'll hand it over to Jeanne. There are a series of claims that are showing up under the Robinson Superior Treaty. One is the Leagues versus Miles claims, which Michelle talked about. So Indigenous people who entered into treaty relationships viewed their unit of measure, because they were in a relationship with the French, as being in leagues, which is 3 times a mile. So that's one claim that's been addressed. There are the annuity claims for the increase in the value of the annuities. There's also a clause in the treaty that talks about the Crown giving less than they thought. So Anishinaabe people were sophisticated bargainers. They knew that the land was worth more. They knew that there were natural resources. So they agreed to less based on what's called, based on an understanding that the value that would be paid to them would be increased over time, because they knew that if they took less and if they agreed that there would be an accounting and a reconciliation over time, and they had more entitlement to a higher annuity over time, that would be promised to them. And then the third important claim is that, just as Michelle said, my First Nation never even went to the treaty signing. We didn't want to. Our chiefs made, at the time, a deliberate decision not to attend. And so if the Royal Proclamation says that in order to have a valid treaty, your chiefs and principal men have to attend at the Treaty Council, and if my chiefs didn't go, how on earth did they enter into a treaty? I don't know. More magic of Canadian law. Yeah, the old win, yeah. So I want to conclude. There's a lot more I can say, but I want to be respectful, and I want to give our elder here some time to talk. There are like 95 more slides that are in my presentation, which I will not talk to you today about, but I want to thank you guys for being such a good audience and for listening so carefully. So I just want to pass it over to Cynthia, who will introduce Jeanne, who will wrap it up for us. Thank you so much.
Miigwech, Nicole. So our final speaker of the evening, Jeanne Malmuagik, whose Anishinaabe name is Macoons, Little Bear, Dodem or clan is Muckwa, Bear, and resides on the west side of Lake Nipigon, Nimbigong, in the Robinson Superior Treaty area. Jeanne is one of the Anishinaabe who believes he is sovereign and has a direct connection to the 1850 Robinson Superior Treaty. His great-great-grandfather is one of the signatories of the 1850 treaty. Jeanne doesn't believe that Treaty of 1850 does not limit his sovereignty. Jeanne is a father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, and member of the Kiashk-Saging Gull Bay First Nation. Hunting, fishing, and trapping are a big part of his life. Jeanne holds the wisdom around traditional ways, traditional law, and therefore he understands what it means to be Anishinaabe, traditional meaning that rightfully belongs to the Anishinaabe. Jeanne also has other skills, having worked in logging operations, as a social worker, First Nation policing, and he conducts traditional ceremonies, lectures, and workshops to maintain the Anishinaabe way of life. Jeanne attended Gull Bay Reserve Day School, and in Thunder Bay, the St. Joseph Residential School that was run by Indian Affairs and the Roman Catholic Church, which has affected his way of life. I actually live very close to there and can see the memorial from my window. Please help me welcome Jeanne Malmuagik.
Thank you. Good evening. Bonjour, miigwech. Jeanne Malmuagik, Anishinaabe Middle Sky. My grandfather and my dad's side, yeah, Malmuagik. And my grandfather on my mother's side is Joe Poyle. And he got that name from, working with the French people. They didn't know how to write or spell his last name. Oshdeebeganwin. That's my grandfather's name, is Oshdeebeganwin. Actually, his father was named Gagedbik, but Gagedbik Shkapkade. There were brothers, Shkapkade, Michel, and Gagedbik. They all belonged to the Menedoshans clan. And Nanny Thompson, he married the Shkapkade woman there, Menedoshans' daughter. Okay, that's good. We're all related in Lake Nipigon. Anyways, on my grandfather, Joe Poyle, his wife was Shashiwe. See, these traditional people, they only had one name, When they began to Christianize, they put Joe Poyle, Joe Michel, they put John. Shashiwe, my great-great-grandmother, also has a direct line to the treaty, which is Mishimko, that elder that gave me the name Macons, Little Bear, eh? The person that signed the treaty is Big Bear, eh? Mishimko, Kichimko. So, that's who I am, and I speak Anishinaabe fluently, and I have proof. I have an original flag that was presented in 1850. It's hidden, you'll never find it. And we have a treaty document, land survey document 30 years after, shrink from leagues to miles, 30 years after. See, these guys, these government people were thinking, And my grandfather tells me there were like 40,000 people around Lake Nipigon. And there's grave sites all around that lake, big epidemics, Pandemics are nothing new to us. We always survived those storms. My grandmother, my mom's mother, what she blamed for the epidemics? Water. She didn't blame people who caused that. Somebody said, how can the people so awful? You're receiving a nice blanket and the next day you're dead, getting buried for your blanket. Those are sad stories, but to survive all that. The reason why I believe I'm sovereign, sovereignty, somebody talks about we're put in Turtle Island. I believe that. And I also believe that all the Anishinaabe that disappeared all the last 150 years are all going to come back. That's how powerful my higher power thinking is, you know? We're going to get that muskrat back to get some more earth for us if we lose it all, you know? That's the creation story, right? Good one. So, treaties. Yes, that word, Oshdeebeganwin. The word before that was shkunagan. We're not dealing with shkunagan. That's Anwenjigan, I might as well call it Anwenjigan. Swampland. Oshdeebeganwin. You know? Put a sign with an X on that paper. It wasn't an application, it was an agreement. You know, when you talk about applying something, put an application, you know what that means? You're begging. You know? You get a status card, you got to sign it. What you're doing is you're begging to be included in your status and a status card registry. We got to stop doing begging. We have, you know, we have to control that in order to be real sovereign people, you know, or opt out of the whole system and create your own. To me, that's what sovereignty is. I'm dealing with food sovereignty right now, eh? And it makes sense, you know, to start to grow stuff, start to help the moons populate, you know, so we could sustain our way of life. You know, because Walmart is not going to be there all the time. You know, we've seen it already, parts of it, shelves are empty. People are fighting over toilet paper. So, I think treaties of 1850 and treaties ongoing, you know, agreements, and then I think these new words came to be, you know, truth and reconciliation. What does that mean? You know what I used to hear growing up? You want to go back to the Indian, go back to the land. You want to go run around in the bush with your buckskin shorts. That's not what it means, you know. Gede pichik iba zasi Anishinaabe. Ba yeshkak diepto novni. You know, my family, the Shkapkade family, Dave Thompson illustrator is the war chief, eh? Oja. He went to 1812 war, or 17? 1812, I think, eh? No, I forgot the dates. But anyway, before the treaties, he went to war, you know, with the British, helping the British. But across the Grand Portage, my family, Ushkapkade is flats. There are my relatives over there, right? They fight for the Americans. That's why the J Treaty is there, eh? There's no boundaries. The Americans will recognize that, but the Canadian government obviously doesn't recognize, you know, any of those. And you know, if you look at the archives of the document of the 1850 treaty, you see how it's folded. It's folded somebody carried it in his back pocket. And there was 3 documents for Gull Bay. You know, the Crown took one, the Anishinaabe people took one, and then somebody else had another copy. And I've heard that they lost those documents and there was only one left. And that Nidoshians had it. You had a priest. He went and got that document. You know, and I'll keep it for you. When they went and wanted to ask for that document back, the church burnt down, there's no more document. And yet it shows up in the archives in Ottawa. You know? I believe that in 1850, Canadian government was bankrupt. They were not in a position to negotiate or make an agreement. You know, if you're bankrupt, you can't make no deals. So the relationship with Anishinaabe people in Canada lies with Britain, Queen. That's where your treaty agreements are. You know, and that's where the covenants you guys talk about, that's where it's got to come from. Not Canada, not province. Provincial government have always, rejected First Nations, what they want to do. And there's case law after case law, trapping, hunting, fishing, every time you say, a couple of weeks ago there, I was in a small claims court that says I'm addressing Section 88 of the Indian Act. My property cannot be seized, deemed to be situated on reserve. Province says, nope, I don't agree to that. You have to take that to the federal court. Yeah? Small claims court don't cost you nothing. I thought they were going to deal with the treaty arguments or the Indian Act arguments. They don't. They ignore them. The provincial government does not intervene in federal legislation dealing with Indians. I know that. Took me all the way to Supreme Court of Canada to deal with the Income Tax Act, Malmuagik versus the Queen. The only single Indian in Canada was able to win in the Supreme Court, standing there by myself, trying to convince 10 Supreme Court judges that my case is good here. The provincial government all along said no. They had to push up all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. And there's a few things that came out of that. If you understand the way the court works, rules of evidence, grounds of probability. Jeanne Malmuagik takes anything to court as long as I tie with the province arguments, it has to come to me. That's the law. The rules of evidence, And there's a lot of First Nations land claims are winning over those principles, by using that. Because the government doesn't have no evidence. He's only trained to knock down your claim, because they think you don't have evidence. There is lots of evidence. Fact, you know? They say those treaties don't exist. I know why they don't exist, because the deals were null and void. They're no good. So what that means is the land still belongs to me. It's not ceded. It's unceded land. So pay up, you guys. I'm getting broke here. And those things are, you know what else I knew? Land, resources, the Queen, the First Nations, there's a tripartite agreement. And there's a bank account. The old people used to talk about 50 years ago. I used to hear that. There's a pile of money sitting in Ottawa. Right? We didn't know what that meant, eh? When we realized that there's a monetary fund for Anishinaabe, 40% of the resources are set aside for the benefit of First Nations. And who intercept that? Canada. You know? Department of Indian Affairs and Northern Development. So where do you think all that money went? Northern Development. We pay for all the highways and roads and bridges, you know? Taxpayers didn't pay that. Taxpayers pay for their politicians, I think, you know? And that's the truth. And what I find out too is there is no money. Canada is still in debt. They operate in debt. Over $30 million in debt. $100 million in debt. You know why they do that? Because every 100 years the Queen wipes out that account to zero and they start over again. I'm gonna get in trouble there. Is it safe to walk out that door? But people should know that, eh? The average people should know that the real truth is about treaties, about the whole situation, how things work. You know, we operate on a fictitious dollar. It's nothing. Tomorrow the computer system could collapse and then we'd have no money in the bank. You know. So we gotta start purchasing our hammers, our nails and stuff like that, you know, tools that we need in case that happens, especially First Nation communities, you know. And there's another thing I wanted to touch on is that my people, my ancestors, and they had a way of life, had culture, had language, they had tradition, you know, and those things were never recognized. I think it's just starting to recognize a lot of that stuff, you know, and I think when we're moving forward, I think we have to acknowledge, you know, that the landowners, stewards of the land, regardless of boundaries that created, you know, because they don't mean nothing to Anishinaabe, still their land, you know, it doesn't mean, you know. Look at the people that expropriated the land. The boundaries didn't mean nothing to them. Tomorrow I want to make your reserve smaller. You know? They break laws, they break agreements. Anishinaabe principles is they speak the truth. Eh? It's an honor to say, as long as the grass is green, the rivers flow. you know, and the sun shines. That's very powerful statements. And they believed in that. When Crazy Horse says, where the sun now stands, I will fight no more, he says. Did he give up? He didn't give up. He just said, I'm not going to fight where the sun stands, you know. But everybody read that as he gave up the war. He didn't, you know. Preacher Gibad Zisi Anishinaabe, you know. And the thing I want to say is these people that sign those agreements, you know, the reports, you know, they say, oh, a big drinking party after the signing of the treaty, and you're falling off the boat, and we had to put Mashemko in the boat and ship him out. Maybe there were some like that, but not the leaders, you know, because they had pipe ceremonies. There's no mention of pipe ceremony, you know, on those agreements. There were, you know, these people, you know, they represent the clan, the Dodem, Makua, you know, Eagle, clans, eh? Totem pole is Mia Inozit, eh? That's your level, your governance is the totem pole. And that's the law, those were the laws. And if you violate those laws, you know, in the long run, you're going to pay. That's the belief Anishinaabe has on natural law. You know, if you violated people's law, people's rights, individual rights, it's going to come back to you, you know. Maybe not you get away with it, but your family will pay for it, your grandchildren. And that's what's happening, you know. Climate change and, you know, things are, you know, not going to be nice and rosy and cozy all the time. So that's the prophecy, the seven fire teachings. There are going to be some hard times. My grandfather said to us, you know, before he passed away, he says, he was talking to my brother who was chief, eh? He says, I don't think you'll be able to fix Gull Bay unless there's a Great Depression again. Think about that. Unless there's a Great Depression. What did he mean by that? You know, so we're trying to figure out. In the 30s, they survived because they were sovereign. They were living off the land, the ones that could hunt and fish. But there was a lot of them already domesticated, I guess. So, I didn't have a punch clock, time clock here at 10 minutes before 9 o'clock. Is that enough time to ask questions? Thank you for listening. I hope that makes sense.
Chimigwitch, Jeanne. Yeah, there was just one last thing I wanted to mention, that I really appreciate all of what the speakers had to say, and that while it is difficult to hear some of this, it's really important. They're really important contributions to the conversations that are happening all across Turtle Island today. Conversations that we need to have. And how are we doing for time, Evelina? Do we have time for any questions? 8:52. Yeah, okay. Does anyone have any questions for any of the speakers?
Yeah, I just want to say, you my grandson, he joined the army, 4 or 5 years now. He's been shipped off to Latvia to fight the war. That's the way we were. We come to ask our duty, we did it. So, pray for his safety all the time. So, be with you guys for.
I don't really have a question, but I have a little more.
Okay, sure.
I just wanted to say thank you to the presenters. And obviously the crowd is left somewhat speechless, right? How do you question someone who comes in and shares knowledge with you unless you're seeking even more knowledge? So if there aren't any questions, that's just my remark, is that the crowd has been left speechless and has learned a lot from this. So thank you.
Miigwech, Kayla. So yeah, last call for questions. Oh, we have one over here. There.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the presenters. That informative and very touching moment we had with you. It is heartbreaking to see the history of how we got here.
We have a mic. If
Okay. Thank you very much. It's dangerous to give me a microphone. My wife will tell you. So thank you very much, and thank you for holding the event this evening. It's a beautiful event and very moving. So there were a lot of things raised tonight, but Jeanne, you mentioned about holding the British monarchy accountable for all of this, and there has been, I believe, First Nations delegations who have tried to do that. Has there been? That have went to England and tried to make a legal case that the British monarchy should be held at least largely or partly responsible for the colonial activity and all the things that have happened, particularly residential schools. Not only that, should not the churches who were a party to the colonial activity, should they not also be held responsible equally with the British monarchy? Why should our government of Canada be solely responsible for reparation payments financially, when our history shows that it was these churches, the monarchy, and these corporations, like the Bay and all these people that profited from this, should they not all be held responsible as part of reconciliation and remedying and reconciling the situation?
Yeah, is this on? Yeah, what you need to understand is the Queen is got the power to control the church. If you go back history in the biblical times, Levitical priests and Melchizedek priests, and they used maritime law. I think in the early treaties they talk about rivers, lakes. That's the only power the Queen has. Is using the maritime law. When they incorporated Canada is a corporation of the United States. I don't know if you guys knew that. So the United States controls Canada through their charter, not the Queen. It's a separate legal entity. So when they start segregating Indian issues, Indian lands and Indian monies, they hijack the responsibility. So we look after the Indians, but did they do that? No. That's what we're saying. Canadian government said, we'll look after Indians. And then yet when you listen to the stats in Canada, it's awful, you know? You make a budget for $30 billion for Anishinaabe people. How much does that money land on the First Nations? $5 for every head. How much does it land in Thunder Bay per head? You know, a year. Think about that. You know, those are the things that we're not schooled in. You know, how the distribution of money in grants, how they work. You know? I don't know how to answer your question, so you have to tell the government to leave the Indians alone. They'll let them look after their own funds that the Queen sets aside for them. Billions of dollars. Last time I heard they drained that account already. We didn't have any input at all. You know? So, lots to learn. And I better keep quiet before I get in trouble here. I noticed that we talk about it all the time.
Jeanne. So this concludes the formal part of our evening. There are light refreshments for you in the lobby. Please help yourself. And yeah, Jeanne to everyone for coming tonight.
The temptation to just hello, everyone.